All right, so that's me, or my name. I got a history degree here at the University of Florida. I kind of tripped into it. I was hanging out at Christian lunch, and they stopped giving me free lunch, so I went to take some courses. Actually, I'm a little bit like Ravi. I went to, well, some ways. I went to school later. I was 42, but I was determined to act like 12. Exactly. All right, so I got to give a presentation. Those are my extra 5 minutes. All right, so Foundation Bhaktivedanta Institute, documents from Richard L. Thompson Archives. I'm co-director of this project. It's a small project. A lot of the folks here working with us on it. Bob's the other co-director, because you need at least one adult on the project. Christy's been involved. Udi here, technical, has been involved with the web design. Chris Beadle has been involved. We worked through we got a lot of papers from Denia. Richard's husband, wife. Richard was her husband, as far as I understand gender reasons. Richard was, Richard was one of the founding members of the Bhaktivedanta Institute. It was established in the 70s, and he collected every dang piece of paper we found. So many documents. He was involved from the earliest days, and he had papers of everything, along with his own prolific work. We found so much material. So we went through, we organized it. We had cases and cases and cases of papers. Some of it we shipped to India, to the Bhaktivedanta Research Institute, I think it is. They work with the TODP there. I was just there. Is that it? What do I get? Research Center. Research Center. I was just there visiting. They work with the TODP and other projects, and they do a lot of documents, ancient text scanning, but they kept some of this old research that wasn't directly related to Richard's work. All right, so we set up, we organized it, digitized it, we got a website up there, simple address, RLT Archives, or Sadhaputta.com, if you're familiar with this devotional name. This is a snap of the site. For our purpose, so we get a lot of so many things. We get a lot of scientific papers, a lot of essays for the Congregational magazine, I guess for the Christian organization, cosmography work, cosmology books. So it's a place to keep his prolific work as an active part of the discourse. For our purposes, we'll focus on Bhaktivedanta Institute, and he kept a lot of historical documents. And this would, okay, so we'll get to that. This is some of his work, just to briefly. He was a mathematician. His dissertation in the early 70s was selected by the American Mathematical Society for its exceptional potential, his research, quality of research. He was published by them. His dissertation advisor was Frank Spitzer, a well-established mathematician at Cornell. And he somehow snuck, he was involved with the Christians at that point. He snuck us into this publication by the Mathematical Institute. It's not your standard mathematical equation, but it worked for them. He also did some textbooks. This is brief. He did a lot of collaboration with Narendra S. Goel. He was a Sunni at the time, and elsewhere later did some research for NASA. Funded for them other research as well. So he has peer-reviewed scientific papers. Did professional work, did a lot of stuff that passed the peer review of this congregational type magazine for outreach. This was a cover article of some of his work in cosmology, ancient cosmology. So he was an active fellow in the field. And we're going to focus on Bhaktivedanta Institute. This is in the 70s. Here he is with Dr. Srup Damodar, who was really a central figure here. We'll talk briefly about him. I have names and stuff. But there'll be more. I know there'll be 2 speakers tomorrow. I have names written down. Rajendra Swami and Rajapati Swami will be talking more at length about Bhaktivedanta tomorrow. T.D. Singh. There's Thompson. This is Prabhupada. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. He brought this tradition, long ancient tradition, with roots in the South Asian context, for euphemistic language here. Brought it, established in a Western context. Here's Rupa Yuga, his devotional name, Robert Corrins. He was a manager of this project early on, and Michael Marchetti, I believe is pronounced. He still remains active. He's based in New Jersey. And here, one of their early projects, just to bring it home here a little bit, was this conference I'll talk about, Life Comes from Life conference in Riyadh in '77, about 40 years ago. T.D. Singh, Thompson, Webb, he's active in Russia and Ukraine area. We'll see a film from tomorrow, the next day, Marchetti again, and this fellow here, Robert Cohen, also known as Bob Cohen. I think he got reinitiated. Okay, so here's just to some of the background. So Prabhupada brought this tradition to the West, and he was, before he came here and hung out with the Westerners in the West, he was doing his own outreach. This is his first book. It was on the topic, he called it Easy Journey to Other Planets, but it was I would say, I describe it as I was going to say riffing, but he's sort of, in the news, this is the 60s, late 50s, the space race is on. He was particularly riffing off the recent discovery of a particle called antimatter, a type of energy, and he was playing with it in some BTG essays in his own little journal he was publishing and distributing, riffing on that to start to talk about the spiritual energy as being an alternate energy to material energy. So he's playing with that.
Stay by the microphone, people back here.
Okay, okay. Can I walk with it a little bit? Because I'm fidgety. Okay, so he was riffing on that. I'm going to use the slang. And then he got a response from a scientist, a well-established scientist at Gujarat University, who also, being from India, was very familiar with Vedantic literature. I'll use that language. And so based on that exchange, they had numerous letters. Prabhupada got inspired. This was his first published book, to write this book, this sort of interaction with scientific dialogue and public discourse. And he dedicated this book to the scientists of the world with the blessings of his own spiritual master, which from a Vaishnava perspective is probably about as good as it's going to get if a guru gives you the blessings of his own guru in turn. So he he's keeping it positive here. All right, so this is a little example from their exchange that Prabhupada published at the beginning of this book. And this scientist, one of the things he's pointing out here is in one sense you're co-opting this term antimatter and sort of extrapolating to have a discussion about spiritual energy, but actually the scientists themselves are using the term antimatter in a different context. They're still thinking of it as an alternate form of the material energy. Perhaps a better word he will say here is anti-material. It's in here someplace. Antimatter is the opposite kind. It's not spirit. Spirit, matter comprehends, blah, blah, blah. Antimatter can do none of these things. Matter and antimatter can't comprehend. Your analysis is therefore strictly correct if applied to anti-material. Gets into some Vedic technical language. So he's in one sense correcting or fine-tuning the discourse, and Prabhupada here is fine with it. For one thing, he's publishing this, and then he's saying, here's my pointer. The subject matter, well, one thing is I'm very much encouraged by, to go through the contents of your, there's a lot of valuable information there. The subject matter in my article under reference authorized, and this is how he's qualifying his own authority. It's authorized as far as it refers to the conclusions of the Gita. He's claiming his authority, he's speaking about the Gita, and he's engaging these other concepts, and that context is how I'm reading it. I may also inform you that my concept of antimatter is exactly what you call antimaterial. Technically, it may be that I have not expressed the exact word used by the physicists, but I've tried to explain the word antimatter in light in the sense that you say is antimaterial. So, he's not here trying to redefine the discipline of physics and project his expectations on them. He's willing to engage. And this isn't just him. Well, this wasn't, when the BBT published this work in English, this is in English too, but in America, the movement was started in the 70s. They didn't include this, I guess because it's not that relevant, anyways, it wasn't included, but this is valuable. It's easy to get. We have it on the website. It's many places online. Thompson had one of the original books. But this wasn't a mysterious thing. In Prabhupada's official biography by ISKCON and the BBT, published in 1980, there's a discussion there that Bhaktivedanta Swami was well aware that scientists were not speaking of anti-material in the sense of eternal or spiritual, but he thought of using their scientific terms to capture the interest of the scientific-minded people. So that was his attitude to engage in this discourse, at least within the context of this text. Yeah, so one reason I'm going on and on about this, because there was a recent academic critique of Prabhupada's relation and ISKCON's relation to science, and one thing that scholar was going on about is how Prabhupada was trying to prove that scientific discoveries gave credence and proof to the spiritual world. And that's an argument, but it doesn't appear that's what he's doing here in the original text, nor is it what the BBT publication, that's the authorized, they weren't considering it that way either, so there could be more complexity here. All right, that image, well, it's good enough. Okay, now we're up into the 70s. There's a movement here of young Western disciples. Prabhupada is working with them. They have an international society already by this time, temples around the world. He's starting to attract a few people with more advanced educational training, and most notable among them is Bhakti Swarup Damodar, at the time called Swarup Damodar. He was from India, as you might guess, from Manipur, grew up in a Vaishnava family, is my understanding. You'll hear a more authoritative take on this tomorrow. So very comfortable with this tradition. He grew up swimming in it. And then he was in America finishing up his PhD in biochemistry, I think at UC Irving. So he's very well trained in the scientific disciplines as well, very familiar with them as well. So he's coming. 1970 he joined full time, so there's some-ish. And immediately Prabhupada took to him. They're going on morning walks. This is in California, I assume Venice Beach or close by. And actually the topic of science, the exchange came up naturally. Excuse me. Bhakti Swarup Damodar, you see a picture here, has a recorder with him, and this is a side note. Actually, these are some of the earliest morning walk recordings. 72, you go to, they're all from LA with Bhakti Swarup Damodar mostly, and 73, these recordings would end up becoming a basis for a book, a famous book within this context called Life Comes from Life. And I've heard accounts that actually at that point on, people started to bring the recorder out regularly. They'd started recording morning walks regularly. But it was really, that too, as a side, it was issued by Bhakti Swarup Damodar as discourse. But he's with people who have some background in these topics. He can bring it up to another level, perhaps. His other disciples, they're not, foolish. That many of them are also college educated. They would also engage in these discourses. I did a paper on this. Where we're going with this is these discourses were recorded. We have the transcripts, are widely available for the last 30 years. But this particular book is not accurate historical account. It's more of a dramatization. And I'm sympathetic, but it is what it is. So let's look at this a little bit, just to have perhaps a better sense of what this discourse was and how it's been received and understood. So these recordings would be going to LA at the time. They had a little thing going on called Golden Avatar Studios. They collect these tapes as a central repository, copy them, and send them out for a subscription service. This was an ad in that Back to Godhead magazine. So these recordings with Bhakti Swarup Damodar went out. Some of them from 73, and it was interesting. Devotees responded. These devotees in Germany, the first books they were publishing was around this time in German, so they have a crew there working on German translations. They heard these tapes. They liked them. Prabhupada was asked, can we do some of these dialogues as a book? Prabhupada said yes, and it turned 74. The first edition of this book was in German, called That. And we'll move on. I'm still working on English. So at the time, the tape ministry wasn't that well organized yet. Not till the late 70s when they start to work on the biography project under the BBT steering. And they started to really systematize at that point. Ranjit, is he here? Did a paper on that. It was published in anyways, it was published in ISKCON Studies, something. All right, so the English edition was published. They got a manuscript as a basis, and what they got was a translation of the German edition back into English. It appears. And this is the evidence. So here was the German edition. This is the second chapter, 19th April 1973. They misspelled the name of the park because they don't live in Los Angeles, anywhere close. Their first sentence here is, well, I can detect that has something to do with archaeologists. And here's this English version. We see that here, archaeology. You know, the English editors decided maybe not, that's a good start. Here's another thing here. Prabhupada's talking something about these terms here from the Gita, Sattva, Raja, and Tama, goodness, passion, ignorance. And here we see that here. Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas. And here they're going to start. The English, this is a working manuscript. I'm sure there was a number. And here we see they're going to start there. Here's the English edition. All right, very good. Modern technology. I got one. And here we see the English edition starts with that. So it's following the German edition. And here what we have is, you know, I had a timer in my iPhone and I didn't even put it on. But at any rate, it doesn't read the same. Maybe this, under my superintendence, it has some correspondence. The material energy is all something here working everywhere. But there's nothing else here that seems to match. This is a transcript of the recorded conversation. It doesn't appear to match. You have a hard time finding the exact correspondence. That suggests that these German devotees, perhaps listening to tapes, get inspired, and put something together. It's not a disciplined treatment, perhaps, is one way to look at it. Here's something that they put in the published version. According to Darwin, Darwin's father is a monkey, and then, you know, apparently that got a guffaw. He has theorized foolishly, so it's a little provocative, but yeah, that's cool. Okay, you know, monkeys. He's a monkey, man. The guy's a monkey. But here, we don't even see that anywhere here. I don't find it here. I haven't yet found it in the rest of the transcript. So there's a little bit of creative liberties going on, and this was a remains an influential book. I think it's useful for certain things, but it's not useful as a historical accurate account. We do have accurate accounts. The archives have put out a digital encyclopedia of all the materials they have. The transcripts included since the early 90s. Online, you can get it now of any source. This would be a section on the morning walks from 73. Here it would be. You click on that. That's the date. And here you get the archival transcript with the recording. You can check yourself. So these things have been available for a good 25, 30 years. There's no conspiracy here. But for scholarly purposes, I highly recommend checking some of these accounts with the, okay. Archives, the archives on the BI. So the BI, these are early morning walks, a source of inspiration. Bhakti Dharma is a real central figure. Here he is again. They were with Prabhupada now, 76, Washington, D.C. Prabhupada's last major tour, I think it was his last tour of the United States. Here's Richard Thompson, Rupanuga, Richard Corrins, and Marchetti, a few of the central characters with Prabhupada, 76, Washington, D.C. They were all gathering there with Prabhupada, getting instructions, discourse, and so on. And these are recorded as well. Here's another picture early on from about this period. I think it could have been a year later. They're going over some of the material they're publishing. This would be the editorial board. Singh, Swarup Damodar. Here's William Deadweiler. I think he's here someplace. He's still extant, as well as Bob. Richard Thompson, etc. These people are still active, some of them. Here's an excerpt from these conversations, just to give you some sense of complexity here, or broadening it. Here's a question from Bhakti. This is, he's instructing his science disciples. So what's the problem here? You scientists, we're not claiming you're all nonsense, that you're good men, but you should know your limits. So Swarup Damodar is proposing that. Prabhupada seems to be agreeing. You should not, so to the science, you should not be so proud falsely. That is our point. And what falsely proud about what? And mislead others that there's no God. A very basic theistic argument. This is going to be bad time-wise, but I appreciate it. Because you've accepted as authority that there is no God, they will accept it. The scientists, atheistic evangelicalizing in the name of science hiding behind professional science, a reputation to evangelize a metaphysical proposition. So they'll accept it based on the reputation when an atheist hides behind a science. Then our back to movement will stop, so therefore we must challenge this nonsense, and this nonsense is that there's no God. It is a fight because and here he says it plainly, because you say there is no God, we say you are all nonsense. So there's another scholar who would argue, from what I can recollect, that Prabhupada has essentialized all science as nonsense and rascals, but the context is in this very basic theistic, atheistic debate that often hides behind the religion and science discourse. And here Prabhupada saying, I think Isaac Newton, says, we must challenge. We must say it. You are challenging, we must challenge you back. But you accept God, then we have nothing to complain about. We're good. And then here, I think Sir Isaac Newton said like that, quote, the vast knowledge we have simply gathered, a few grains of sand on the beach of knowledge, something like that. That is good. So, interesting. There's another, this is from Narendra Soup, the same conversation for that time period. They may say, we're limited, scientists, we're limited, we're faulty, this and that, you can criticize, but what do you got that's better? So Prabhupada responds, well, I may not have something, I may not show, but I'll give you an example. You've manufactured a 747, you use that a lot, that was the hot technology, and God has manufactured a mosquito, so you do that. So Prabhupada would say, sometimes he'd use planets. God's planets. So I see. I'm a layman. I see there's another better manufacturer than you. I may be a layman, but I can see that you cannot do it. So this is an argument. And then I'll speed it up exponentially after this. So you take your credit as much as you've done, but if you want to take the place of God, then we must, for laughs, slap you left and right. That is our business. That is our business, because we cannot give you credit better than God. There is nobody equal to God, nobody better than God. That is our preaching. As soon as you admit that we are under God, then we have no quarrel. You admit it, then we have no quarrel. You admit that, yes, we are under God, then we have friends. My point here is his basic issue with the scientists is this atheistic preaching that has gone on in this discourse. I'm going to really skim it up. I know, but I was only given 20 minutes to begin with. As opposed to, but I'll get it done real quick, very quick. I'm not letting go of this sucker, man. I tell you. All right, so this is something you'll have to explore on your own, or I'm not getting dinner. We have a lot of historical documents. You go to the website; they're all listed here. We published a book. It's available over there. You can skim through these documents of the first conference that these devotees were working on. Here's some more. This is some of the early materials that were produced during the 70s, these monographs, other materials. Copies of these are all up on the website. Some of this is in that book, the facsimile, for your coffee table. Where you served decaffeinated coffee. Other documents are the original charter. This is online. Here was for this first conference. There was a brief outline. They're brainstorming for a mission for the conference. Many, many documents. This was a draft of some of these early books, one of the monographs. Editorial board, all these documents. These are all foundational documents of the Bhaktivedanta Institute. You can look at it, get a sense of what these people were thinking, how they were arguing, debating, considering their mission, what they're doing. Here's a cool one. They didn't have internet back in the 70s. I can remember that far back. But they had produced a brochure. They mailed out to scientists. This was the brochure inviting scientists to the conference. Describes the conference, their topics. Very interesting. Probably Sadhguru had the last one. Here's the people who came there. A very good selection of scholars, both from inside and outside the movement, and more. Okay, I got. Here's another one. Here's cute. There's another picture of Bob. Okay, and more. How can you refuse me that? And okay, so we got more. Here's the original mission statement published, and I think I'm out of rope, man. I'm done. Yeah. We have copies of gifts as door prizes of this book tomorrow, the contemporary edition. All right, I got to get the hell out of here.